circumstances has a chicken drive. Where they try to herdle these chickens on horseback to get them to the town, because the town gets under siege. So they have this like chicken drive.
Yeah, I'm curious. Something that this reminds me of is Don Quixote, where in one sense there's this foolish man in the center, but really the satirization is on the Renaissance, early modern Spanish society that Cervantes is tweaking. Would you say that there's an object of your satire? Is it sort of the country western genre? Are there aspects of frontier society? I don't know if you had satire in your mind as you're writing this, but do you have any sort of object like Cervantes did?
Yes, to a degree. And it's funny you should bring up Don Quixote, because this is my second novel. And in both cases, I did not have Don Quixote in mind, yet in both cases, reviewers, I will say, have mentioned that. They said, this puts me in mind of Don Quixote. The first book was called The Old Limey, and it was about an elderly British general who has to go rescue his goddaughter out from some drug gang in Los Angeles. And that he has memories, but including in his memories are fantasies of his experience traveling the latter the end days of the British Empire. And in this book, yes, it's true. Custer is this in very idealistic, very knightly person devoted to honoring women, doing his duty, all those things that you might attribute to Don Quixote. And again, this is Don Quixote is both the idealist who's a fantasist. Custer's not so much a fantasist, but the book does poke good-humored, well-meaning fun at his idealism and his, in some ways, his childlike simplicity. And that is not necessarily a cutting remark. He was in some ways an innocent sort of person. So I think there's a style of humor which maybe in our own times we're losing track of, where you can both have fun with a public figure, but do so affectionately. And this book has a lot of fun with Custer. I found myself laughing at my own jokes when I was reading it. But at the same time, it is admiring of Custer, and it's admiring of people like Custer, and it's admiring of the officers who actually, this brings us back to Teddy Roosevelt, who served both the blue and the gray. Teddy Roosevelt gave his famous speech. I can't remember the year, but Teddy Roosevelt was someone who had boyhood memories of the Civil War, and whose mother was from the South, his father was from the North. And I believe he gave the speech when he was president, but it was a speech largely about Abraham Lincoln. And in the course of the speech, he said, one of the great things we have as Americans is that we can take pride in the heroism of the North and the heroism of the South, with those who fought in the Confederate gray under Robert Lee and those who fought in the Union blue under Ulysses S. Grant, because both sides fought for the right as they saw it. And that sort of, again, magnanimity and victory, which even veterans of the war had towards their foes. And it seems to be gone. And somehow after 150 years, rather than coming to a greater, more humane understanding of our history, we seem to be coming to a more sort of agitational propaganda, really heinous in my mind, vile cartoon version of it that is really harmful. I mean, it's very bad if you poison the well of your nation's history as I think is being done now. And I think it's being done with intent, because that old phrase, he who controls the past controls the future. If you convince people that America's past is one long litany of horrors, well, then you need to change this country dramatically in some other way to make it better. And that's not to say that America can't be made better. It wasn't made better along the way. But when I look back at those figures in history, at any point in American history, yes, some of these men were ruffian men. Yes, some of these men had to wrest the country from, in their minds, the wilderness and hostiles. But they were still, you got to see them as men in full. And, when I was growing up in the 1960s, 1970s, it was you could still it was still assumed in most any Western you saw that there'd be these figures who were ex-Confederate servicemen who were treated well. I mean, they're treated as admirable men. You even had a couple of movies, like, I'm trying to remember the names now, The Undefeated with John Wayne and Rock Hudson, or Major Dundee with Charlton Heston and who was it? Roger. I can't remember the British guy's name, but anyway, the taking off point was it was Union troops and Confederate troops coming together to fight a common enemy. In both cases, it was the French in Mexico. Or you had, I think it was 1960, you had the Battle of New Orleans was a hit song praising old Andy Jackson. Well, now, Andrew Jackson is swept up this idea of the genocide of the Indians and the Trail of Tears, and we can't think any good things about Andrew Jackson. We can't think good things about Robert E. Lee. We have to tear down his statues and all that. I think that's madness. I think the sort of iconoclastic inquisition of these figures is just bad history and from a novelist point of view, bad humanity. That's not who these people actually were as individuals, as human beings.
Yeah, that's something when I taught history classes in terms of looking at historical figures and how they compare today. Think about box office receipts adjusted for inflation, that Gone with the Wind, if you adjust for inflation, is the most successful movie of all time. But if you just look at raw dollars, it doesn't match up. And it's silly just to think, well, if you aren't completely up to 21st century values, then we have to disregard you totally. It's a lazy way to look at the past. Something else with Custer, and beyond this factor of using Custer to help better appreciate our past and see that for all the faults of people in the 19th century, there are a lot of things that we have to learn from them and a certain amount of respect owed. Are there any other things you think we get out of looking at the life of Custer?
Yeah, that's a good question too. Some of them I think I touched on. The things that leapt out to me and that I hope resonate from this book are patriotism. I mean, Custer was someone who devoted his entire life to the service of his country. And I mentioned that he, in many ways, liked his Indian scouts, admired the Indians. He did so while at the same time, and disparaged the reservations. He did so at the same time acknowledging that progress was inevitable and that he was charged as part of his duty to be one of the engines of it. So I think, this sort of this understanding of him too. I think Custer has just been so ill served by just sort of the popular imagination lately, which I think is much colored by, I think, a terrible movie, but a very popular movie called Little Bighorn, where Custer is just held up as this ridiculous figure, and that too was done with political intent, because that movie came out around 1970, and the idea was, look, you got all these bullheaded, arrogant guys like Custer, racist people like Custer, who murdered Indians, and now look, here we are, killing Vietnamese in Vietnam, and this idea, this Western imperialism left the Pacific Ocean and is now going on in Southeast Asia. No, let's stop with the politicking. And let's see these people as they really were. Custer was a man dedicated to doing the right thing as he saw it. And what he saw as the right thing was, I grew up in California. So if it wasn't for the winning of the West, I wouldn't be where my life would be entirely different, because I'm a fifth or sixth generation Californian from before the gold rush. So for me, the winning of the West is actually partly a personal matter. Right. But I just wish we'd get back to this. It doesn't have to be, breast beating or artificial patriotism. It's just a natural affection for your country, your nation's past. It's what used to be, I think, most people's birthright. And I think as education becomes more and more politicized, it becomes more and more important to remember the human aspect of things. That's why one of the reasons why I shifted from doing straight military nonfiction to doing a novel was to capture more of this human aspect, less about, the right flank was turned here and this battle was won here. That's all interesting and good, but I really wanted to capture the people and bring home to folks the history on an individual scale.
All right. Well, the book is Armstrong, your first book in the Custer of the West series, and we'll have to have you back on when the follow-up novel and however many others come along. So, Harry, thank you for joining us.
Great. My great pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Well, that was the episode for today. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it. First of all, I'd like to thank the Knowlton's Rangers, and especially our spy masters, Baron Fraser, Carl from Norway, Chris from Maine, Moondoggy from Ohio, and Rick Knowlton, and I'll explain what that means in a second. If you want to support the show and help me keep producing this content, there are 4 easy ways for you to do it. 1, subscribe to the show and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. If you want to do that, you can go to historyunplugpodcast.com and there you'll find instructions. 2, join our Facebook group, which you can find if you just search for History Unplugged. And please like and share posts that I put up about new episodes. 3, submit a question to me so that I can answer it on air. You can email me at info@historyonthenet.com or leave a voicemail. And again, go to historyunpluggedpodcast.com and you'll find instructions. Lastly, and I think this one is the best, is to become one of the Knowlton's Rangers. The Knowlton's Rangers were an elite reconnaissance and espionage detachment of the Continental Army in the Revolutionary War, but it's also the name of the History Unplugged membership program. Learn how to join by going to patreon.com/unplugged. So here's what you get if you become one of the Knowlton's Rangers. If you join at the level of Scout, you can get early access to new podcast episodes, along with enjoying absolutely every single episode of the History Unplugged podcast ad-free. All 270 and counting episodes. If you join at the level of Intelligence Officer, you can also get access to premium episodes, like a multi-part series on the life of Audie Murphy, the most decorated combat soldier in World War II, or the 10-part series Ottoman Lives, a series that looks at the cast of characters that made up the Ottoman Empire, such as the Sultan, the Eunuch, the harem servant girl, and the soldier. And finally, if you join at the level of Spy Master, you get all the same stuff as the Scouts and Intelligence Officers, but you also get a shout-out to you and or your business at the end of each episode, a 3-pack of hardcover history books, plus you will be put at the very front of the line for me to answer your question about history, and I can guarantee I will dedicate an episode that's about an hour long or so to your question. Sign up at patreon.com/unplugged. Again, that's patreon.com/unplugged. Anyway, those are the ways you can help out the show. Thank you so much for your support. Thanks for listening to the History Unplugged podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the show to get your daily dose of all things history related, from ancient Greece to the Cold War. We'll see you next time at the History Unplugged podcast.